talk about the history of Canada. The first people to settle in Canada were the First Nations people, who came across the Bering Strait 40,000 years ago. They settled into various ethnic groups: the Cree, the Inuit, the Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, and so on. But there's 35 native people in Canada. The first European to visit the Canadian shores was John Cabot in 1497, when he was a town explorer sailing for Britain. He discovered Newfoundland. He named it Newfoundland because he found new land. Then came Jacques Cartier in 1534, trying to find the Northwest Passage. Instead, he found a rich fur trade, and sent Samuel Champlain, named Lake Champlain in New York and Vermont, and then founded Quebec City, and then colony of New France, and then Montreal in 1642. Then the British came with Rupert's Land and Hudson's Bay Company in 1660, forming that. Eventually, they found two colonies: Lower Canada, which is Quebec, today's Quebec, and Upper Canada, which is today's Ontario. Then there was a conflict over this territory, over who was to control the rich fur trade in Canada. The British eventually won in 1759, providing in the Battle of Plains of Abraham in the 7 Years' War. Ultimately, then came Americans loyalists who were supportive of Britain during the American Revolution, settled in various provinces in Canada, in today's New Brunswick, Ontario, and Quebec, and Ontario. And then, during the Underground Railroad, African American slaves fled to Canada to escape from slavery, because the British Empire outlawed slavery in Canada and throughout the Empire in 1834. Then the first four original provinces of Canada, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, formed a confederation July 1st, 1867. And the first Prime Minister of Canada was John Macdonald. And so their goal of the Canadian Confederation was to gain as much territory as possible to escape from American expansionism. In 1870, there was a Red River Rebellion against the Métis people, the mixed race people against control. So the Canadian government wanted to manage this area effectively. It's formed Manitoba in 1870. Then British Columbia, colony on the Pacific Ocean, in 1871, joined with the explicit condition that a railroad be built. And then in 1872, Canada purchased the Rupert's Land from the Hudson Bay Company and called it the Northwest Territories. In 1873, Prince Edward Island was bought, basically bribed into joining Canada. In 1878, in the Northwest Rebellion, Canadian First Nations people rebelled against Canada's treatment of the natives. And this gave a more impetus to completing the Canadian Pacific Railroad, which was completed on November 7th, 1885. In 1898, the Yukon Territory was formed after the gold rush in the area was made more to distribute control of the land area. In 1905, the Northwest Territories divided again, with Alberta and Saskatchewan becoming provinces. And in 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador joined, completing the current 10 provinces of Canada. Then came the period of the Quiet Revolution in Quebec, where the church was the province was made to be more secular, and the church was removed from education and culture in Quebec. This directly led to the separatist crisis of Quebec, as Quebec tried to become a separatist country for the Front de Libération de Québec, the Quebec Liberation Front, which was a separatist organization which bombed the Montreal Stock Exchange, which murdered the Prime Minister of Transport of Quebec in 1970. And then in 1982, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was formed, following the rights and freedoms of Canadians. In 1999, on April 1st, 1999, the Northwest Territories split again with Nunavut, which in Inuktitut means our land. During this time period, the Indian residential schools were formed to force natives to learn English and French to become more European, whatever the hell that meant. Of course, unofficial, also there was sexual and psychological abuse as well. So that is the basic history of Canada.